Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on advanced FAFSA completion. This is our third webinar in our fall series. So thanks for all of you that are returning, and also thank you to those of you that are joining for the first time. Before we get started, I'd like to get a sense of who we have joining us today. I see a couple more people joining us just now. So as you jump online, if you could go over to the chat feature, and just type in what your role is at your school, whether that be a guidance counselor or a career coach or an educator, as well as where you're from. And that doesn't have to be specific. It could just be North Alabama, South Alabama, East, West, Central Alabama, or Birmingham, Jefferson County. You let us know where you're from, and it's just useful information for us to have so that we know who's joining us and how we can tailor the information that we're presenting today. So while we get some of those responses in on the chat feature, I'd also like to give a quick thank you to everyone that participated in last week's webinar that we hosted on Facebook. Our Facebook Live event was for students and their families on FAFSA completion. That event came about as a result of a conversation that we've had with many of you, the guidance counselors and career coaches, looking for there to be a direct connection between your students and their families and experts in financial aid. So we're really happy with the turnout for that. We had a lot of people join us for the live event, and at this point in time, we're closing in on 1,000 views for that video, which is amazing because really at the end of the day, that's just all about us connecting your students to post-secondary educations. Again, thank you for that. So while we just wait for a couple more people to jump online, I'd like to start introducing today's topic, advanced FAFSA completion. To date, we've already gone over an introduction to the Alabama College Campaign, as well as FAFSA Completion 101. That webinar offered us to take a bit of a top-line view at FAFSA completion. And now we're ready to take a bit of a deeper dive into some of the more intricate aspects of the financial aid application. So with that said, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Ms. Sarah Bright. Sarah Bright is my colleague at Alabama Possible, and she is truly our FAFSA wizard. So with that said, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Colby. Good morning, everybody. So today we're going to go over some advanced topics and work through some scenarios. And if you have questions, just let us know, and we'll try to get those answered for you. So today, the learning objectives that we're going to go over: how to determine if a student is independent or dependent, how to support independent students, which parent or parents to include if a student is dependent, how to address complicated tax situations, what to be aware of if a student or parent is an immigrant, what to expect with verification, and where to find additional help and information. So keep calm and FAFSA on. The best thing to know is that, with the FAFSA, it's very complicated, but it can always be fixed. So don't be scared to get your hands dirty. And so just in case you have questions while you're filling it out, in case someone does make a mistake, it can always be fixed and corrected. Okay, so some potential situations. The student is not living with parents. They may live with an aunt or an uncle or someone else in their family, or a friend or relative. Parents have a complicated tax situation. The student or their parents are immigrants. Or the student mentions major life-changing situations such as unemployment, a new sibling, living with additional family members, etc. So some general guidance: always ask the student to tell me more or ask open-ended questions to determine what's really going on. You also want to reassure the student that they'll be able to complete the FAFSA with a few extra steps, and walk through the FAFSA and the guidelines provided with each question. So you'll notice as you fill out the FAFSA, there's a little question mark, usually to the right of the question. And if you hover over or you click on that, then you'll see some extra guidance on where to get the information or further explanation of the question. And those are always really helpful. Also, manage expectations and understanding of verification. I think we all know that the majority of students are being selected for verification, so we're trying to normalize that process. So as you work with students, let them know that there's a possibility that you'll be selected for verification. And you can go ahead and tell them to try to prepare for that. So if they are a dependent student and they have parent information on the FAFSA, one thing that they can do is go ahead and request a tax transcript for the parent, and the student, if they didn't file taxes, they can go ahead and request a statement of non-filing, just to kind of get ahead of the game. So you also want to emphasize the importance of following through in a timely manner if verification or extra documentation is required. And so one thing whenever I work with students is I always let them know, you know, this is your future, this is your process, and you need to keep up with it. Don't expect the financial aid offices to call you back and to, you know, be on top of you. You need to be proactive. And so I always really encourage students to take an active role in this process. So, is the student independent or dependent? So independent versus dependent. A student is independent if the student meets specific criteria demonstrating that he or she does not have family financial support. Independent students do not need to provide any parent information. A dependent student must report parent or legal guardian income. So independent status, what makes a student independent? So a student is independent if they're 24 years old as of January 1, if they have a child or other dependent that receives more than half of their financial support, they're legally married, was in foster care for any period of time since the age of 13, or they were a ward of the court for any period of time since the age of 13. Some other things that will qualify a student as independent, they currently serve in the armed forces, or they are a veteran. They have a legal guardian, but they're not adopted. They are homeless or unaccompanied youth or at risk of becoming one. They're an emancipated minor, or they're beginning a master's or doctorate program. So one thing that I get a lot of questions about is foster care. So if a student was in foster care at age 13 or older, even if it's for one day, a student can answer yes, and that will qualify them as independent. For example, a student says she isn't talking to her parents right now because they got into a fight. She now lives with her aunt. Should the student be categorized as dependent or independent on the FAFSA? And I know we hear this situation a lot, but the answer is still dependent because her mom is still in the picture. They're just not talking right now, and so that would still qualify the student as dependent. So a student was in foster care when she was 15, but now lives with her grandparents. Does the student qualify as independent or dependent on the FAFSA? The answer is independent because since the age of 13, she was in foster care. And so that's what qualifies her as an independent student. So some documentation that may be required if the student is selected for verification. So if the student has a legal guardian, you may need a court-issued or a court-issued document or obtain official documentation. If the student was in foster care, you might need to obtain a court dependency letter from a social worker or an independent living program coordinator. If the student used to be in foster care, you can contact the Child Welfare Agency for a record of that. And if the student is homeless, you can try to obtain a homeless youth determination, or you can get supporting documentation from a counselor or school administrator. If the student is a parent and financially supports the child more than 50%. So this is a little bit tricky because I've been in a situation where I have students who have a child, but they live at home with mom and dad, or they live at home with another family member. And so this is where it gets a little bit tricky because the student, the only way that that student is qualified as independent is if they financially support the child more than 50%. So make sure that you ask those directed questions. And the way that they can demonstrate that is through WIC, TANF, receipts of childcare purchases, child support payments, daycare vouchers, anything that shows that the student financially supports the child. So if the student is not in touch with parents, they left home due to an abusive situation, or parents are incarcerated or incapacitated, this is going to fall under the special circumstances. So you guys would select, or the student would select, I'm unable to provide parental information. And then select under special circumstances, I have special circumstances and I'm unable to provide parental information. At that point, the student needs to contact once they complete their FAFSA, they need to contact the school's financial aid office and ask for a dependency override. And there'll be some more documentation associated with that. But again, it's important to encourage a student to follow up with the financial aid office. Okay, so completing the FAFSA as an independent student. So the housing plan, don't select with parent. If the student plans to live with a foster parent, relative caregiver, or legal guardian, select off campus. Household size, if the student was in foster care on or after their 13th birthday, the student should only include themselves and any spouse or children they support. Don't include siblings, family of origin, foster family, or people living in a group home. So a dependency override, what that looks like, or what that is, a student must contact the college's financial aid office and ask what specific forms or documentation they require. In most cases, a student requires a letter from a high school counselor or another advocate written to the financial aid administrator requesting an override. The letter should include additional documentation from social workers, clergy members, teachers, doctors, counselors, or anyone else familiar with the student's circumstances. And it doesn't have to go into great detail. It doesn't have to be very long. It just needs to be clear and concise and states that individual knows the student's situation and can give a little bit of a background on that. Also, dependency overrides last for 1 year. Pop quiz. Let's see, I think that we were going to actually have a pop quiz, but we're going to skip that for now, and we're just going to keep moving through the webinar. We're having some technical difficulties. Okay, so which parents go on the FAFSA? This is another big question that I get all the time. So here's some scenarios. So parents are legally married regardless of opposite or same sex. Both parents should be listed on the FAFSA. So if you have legal parents, they're not married, but they live together, both parents still go on the FAFSA. If parents are divorced or separated and not living together, you answer questions about the parent who the student lived with the most in the past 12 months. If it's equal, provide information about the parent who provided the most financial support. Parents that are never married or widowed, answer questions about custodial parent only. And then step parents. If the legal parent is married to a step parent, then the step parent's information must also be included on the FAFSA. And so I get that question a lot. So just be prepared for that. Sometimes there's a little bit of kickback because a step parent doesn't want to be included. But if they're legally married, then they're required to submit their information. Okay, so we also have this handout. It's available on our website. And we just tried to make the process easy to determine who the student should put on their FAFSA. So you can see, do any of the following apply to you? So both my parents are deceased, I'm homeless, I've been in foster care or a ward of the court, I'm in legal guardianship, I'm an emancipated minor, I have children or dependents, or I'm married. So if you answer yes to any of those questions, you may file the FAFSA without parental info, but the college may ask for court or government documents for proof of these circumstances. And so if you select, or if the answer is no to any of these questions, and you can see where it continues on through the chart. But we tried to make that kind of simple and easy to read and easy to go through. And again, this is available on our website. So parents and the FAFSA. So a legal parent can be biological or adopted as determined by the state or a birth certificate. A FAFSA can be submitted without parental information, but it will be incomplete. So again, you can still submit it, but it will be incomplete. That's really not going to get the student anywhere. Students will need to follow up with the financial aid office of each college they list on their FAFSA. Again, encourage your student to take ownership of this process. All the schools that they list on the FAFSA, they need to contact and follow up. I believe it takes 72 hours for the information to process. And so once it happens, the student needs to definitely follow up and see what additional information they may need. Special circumstances can be proved, such as an abusive environment or a restraining order. And students may attempt a dependency override. But just know that that's going to require documentation. And if the student or the parent want to pursue that, then they need to be ready for that process. Tax issues. Okay, so tax issues. We'll go over a few of those. Completed taxes. That's very simple. You should be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And I want to say in all instances, if you can encourage the parent and student to utilize that tool, that it just cuts down on being selected for the verification process. If someone is planning to file but they haven't yet, they can still fill in the FAFSA with estimates, but then encourage them to file their taxes and then update it with the data retrieval tool. If they do not plan to file, you can select not going to file, and you can manually enter in wage information. More than likely, then that person will be selected for verification. If the data retrieval tool cannot find parents, go ahead and have them order a tax transcript as soon as possible. They will need it. So make sure that you have them go ahead and be proactive and get that ordered. Okay, some situations where someone might not be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So students or parents who are married and filed as married, filing separately. If someone is married and filed as head of household, that's incorrect filing. So they're not going to be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And more than likely, if they continue on through the financial aid process, then the financial aid office will likely recommend that they need to amend their taxes and file correctly. The parent's marital status is unmarried and both parents live together. If they filed a Puerto Rican or foreign tax return, or they are victims of identity theft. And a special note, if your taxes were recently filed or haven't been filed yet, you're not eligible to use the data retrieval tool. Another thing to note is that amended taxes can now be used. You can now use the data retrieval tool. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of the IRS Tax Transcript screen. So you can order it for free at irs.gov. All you need to do is from the homepage, click on Get Your Tax Record, and you can receive that online or through the mail. And so this just kind of goes over what you need in order to request your tax transcript. And when you're on the website, if you click on transcript types, you'll see a list of the different tax return transcripts. Most of the time, what I see is most common, students will definitely need, or parents will need, a tax return transcript. And if the student didn't file, then they'll need a statement of non-filing. Okay, so some taxes and income changes. Sometimes prior year tax information does not reflect the current financial situation. Examples include job loss, decreased work hours, or divorce and separation. The student must call each Office of Financial Aid and request that they make adjustments to income to reflect their current situation. schools will need to obtain and keep proof of financial hardship. And sometimes, so that can include W-2s, if the parent was maybe, if they are now on disability, they'll need documentation requiring that, but you definitely want to follow up with the financial aid office, and they'll give you a specific list of documents and information that they need. Okay, so now we're going to try the pop quiz again.
Yes, sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. I'm launching a poll, and this is not meant to put anyone down. We just want to check who's paying attention and, you know, try to help you guys gather this information and use it in your own classroom. So I've just launched a poll. It should have popped up on your own screens. There are a couple of questions. They're not too complicated. I'm not trying to trip you up or anything, but I did want to give everybody just a couple of seconds to read some of these questions and select the answer that makes most sense to them. Thank you for those of you that are already selecting answers. I appreciate that. We got a couple of more answers coming in. Good. I'm just going to give it about 15 more seconds or so, just so we can get as many people that want to participate as possible. And then I'm going to close the poll results and share those with you. And then Sarah is going to go over the answer. About 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. All right, Sarah, do you want to go over the answers?
Sure. Okay. So students' parents are divorced and one parent is remarried. The student receives support from both parents, but spends most of her time at her mom's house with her stepdad. Who does the student include on the FAFSA? Okay, it looks like most of you guys everybody got that correct. It would be the mother and the stepfather. Because they're divorced, one parent is remarried, but the daughter spends most of her time at her mom's house, and her mom is remarried. So that's how we came to that determination. Number 2, a student's parents are separated and living together, but it is not a legal separation. How do you report their marital status on the FAFSA? So it looks like this was a little tricky. You guys reported, or 70% of you guys said married, but the actual answer is separated. And the reason is because you can still be separated without having an actual legal separation. And when the parent fills out the information on the FAFSA, it will ask married, divorced, or separated, and then it will ask for a date. So you can still do that. Number 3, true or false? If a parent does not claim the child as a dependent on their taxes, the student can complete the FAFSA as independent. And that's false. It doesn't work that way. So you guys did really good. Thank you so much for paying attention.
Thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome. Okay, so household number. I'm sure you guys have all had some interesting situations with household number. So I've had some situations of my own where I'm helping a student complete the FAFSA, and they state that, it's me and my mom and my dad and my brother and my aunt and my uncle and his 2 kids. And so we're just going to work through that a little bit and give some clarifying information so that you can help the student determine the student and the parent determine the true size of their household. So with the household number, include all children and other people who receive more than 50% of support from their parents and are expected to do so through the end of the year. So the key in that is people who receive more than 50% of support. So include the student even if they are not currently living in the household. Include any unborn children who will be born in the award year. Include children away at college. Include children in graduate school who receive more than 50% of support. And also include nuclear family members that might live elsewhere. So if you have a parent that lives in another country, if they're married. The exception is you don't include foster children. Immigrant families. So immigrant students, eligible non-citizens can receive aid, and eligible non-citizens include a U.S. permanent resident, green card holders, conditional permanent residents, and they'll have an I-55-1C, arrival and departure record, so it's an I-94 that includes refugee, humanitarian, parole, asylum granted, and more. Citizens of the Republic of Palau, or Palau, I'm probably saying that wrong, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and Federated States of Micronesia. Most people, if someone is an eligible non-citizen, they know their situation, and so this is just a brief list for you to reference. So you'll select neither citizen nor eligible citizen if the student is in the U.S. and has been granted DACA, F1 or F2 student visa, J1 or J2 exchange visitor visa, or a G series visa. These students are not eligible for federal aid, but they can still be eligible for other grants and scholarships. The FAFSA student aid report can help them qualify for state aid, and in some states, private scholarships and institutional aid. So it's still really important that they complete the FAFSA. There is still financial aid funds out there. Parents who are immigrants and lack a social security number, you'll need to report all zeros in the social security field, social security number field. You'll also need to print and sign the signature page and mail it because they don't qualify for an FSA ID without a social security number. And then they'll also be ineligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So some additional circumstances, drug charges or convictions. Students with drug charges or convictions prior to completing their FAFSA are eligible for financial aid. Students who receive a drug conviction after completing their FAFSA or while receiving student aid may become ineligible and may need to return financial aid received. Students may become eligible for aid again after they complete an approved drug rehabilitation program or passing unannounced drug tests. Some verification basics. So each student will be notified if they are flagged for verification when they receive their student aid report or by the college. Another way that you can see if a student is selected for verification, I know some of you guys utilize the Alabama Commission for Higher Education Student Lookup Portal, and that information is also available if you look in if you go through your students and you select the FAFSA year, it's going to be the information all the way to the right-hand side of the screen, and you'll just see a yes or a no. So if you're helping your students through the FAFSA process and you're monitoring your FAFSA completion at your school, that's one way that you can help your students be proactive. So if you let them know that they will be selected for verification, they can go ahead and follow up with the school and get that process started. You also want to emphasize that your students need, again, to follow up with each financial aid office at each school that they applied to. Each school is going to have a different set of paperwork. It's all the same guidelines, but it may look different and they may require some different things. And so it's very important that they do that process at each school that they're interested in attending. Help your students and their parents collect specific documentation if possible. And remember that a financial aid officer's role is to help students complete the verification process. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Okay, Colby, are we going to do another pop quiz?
Yeah, why not? That one went pretty well. I think that it's useful to actually apply the information that we're all absorbing in this presentation and apply it to a couple of scenarios. So I'm going to launch the poll again here. It should be popping up on everybody's screen, and we'll take a little bit of time for you to go through the questions and reply or to provide your answer. We have 5 questions this time. So take your time as you read through some of the information. Think about the information that Sarah's just shared with us and apply your answer. In the meantime, I did want to say that I see the questions in the Q&A as well as in the chat, and I'm just holding those until the end. I'm not ignoring you. I just want to give Sarah the opportunity to get through the presentation, and then we'll go into detail on some of the questions that you're asking. So I'm going to give it about 20 more seconds on the poll, just so everybody can go through and select some answers. And again, just like last time, we're going to go back and review the answers that you've selected with Sarah. She's got a cheat sheet. So just about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll and then I'm going to share the results and Sarah's going to go over the answers. You ready, Sarah?
I am.
All right. And the results are shared.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the first question, student says that he is 18 years old and independent and believes that he does not need to get his parents' information. Should the student be categorized as dependent or independent on the FAFSA? And you guys all voted that he is a dependent student, and that is correct. So he would need to try to get information from his parents. Number 2, true or false, a 16-year-old high school student with a drug charge is ineligible for federal student aid. That is false. Number 3, which of the following people cannot be included in the household number on the FAFSA? And you guys all selected foster children, and that is correct. True or false, the student has deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, and their parents do not have papers. The student cannot complete the FAFSA, and you guys all selected false, and that is correct. True or false, a student is a U.S. citizen or eligible immigrant, but their parents do not have social security numbers. The student can still file the FAFSA electronically. So the answer to that is actually false. It looks like you guys were split. Because the parent does not have a social security number, then they are not eligible to use, to create an FSA ID, and therefore they cannot electronically sign the FAFSA. So the student can still sign it, but the parent will need to print out the paper and mail it in, and once that's received by the Federal Department of Education, then they will be able to go ahead and process the FAFSA.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to close the poll and let you move on.
Thanks. Okay. So some additional resources. Dependent and independent specific scenarios, financial aid and homeless youth, criminal convictions, and FAFSA for students with non-traditional needs. Let me go through that. So you should call the financial aid offices. They're usually happy to answer your questions. We also have a worksheet for the FSA ID that helps you, or that helps the parent and the student go through what they need in order to create an FSA ID. And also, so they can write down their questions and their answers and their username and password and try to keep track of that. We also have our handout, Who to List as Your Parent, and we went through the little yes-no flow chart. And we have another handout, So You Submitted the FAFSA, What's Next? And so what are those next steps the student may need to take? All of this is available on our website. So you can download those PDF copies. We can share that with you. If you have additional questions or you have some difficult situations that you're not sure how to navigate, please call us. That's what we're here for. The number is here on the screen. And you can also email us at cashforcollege@alabamapossible.org. We also have a couple of upcoming webinars. So we have one November 1st. It's using data for your campaign, and then another one November 8th about the American graduate. So please stay tuned for those. And also, if you have any topics that you're curious about or you want more information about, we are always open to suggestions. We want to make sure that we give you content that you can use and that's relevant for you.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. And Sarah's going to stick around for just a little bit to answer any additional questions that you might have. Sarah, do you mind going back to that last screen? So while you submit those, you can submit them either through the Q&A tool or feature in Zoom or through the chat feature. I'm going to look in both places and make sure that we get all of your questions answered. While you submit those, I'd just like to talk a little bit more about our upcoming webinars. So next week, using data for your campaign, we're going to have Mr. Ron Leonard. Hey, Ron, I see you on here. Thanks for joining us today. He's going to be presenting on using data for your campaign and specifically on the student lookup portal. I know that many of you that attend these webinars have access to that and are constantly utilizing that tool. I know that there are a couple of updates to the software that Ron's going to be taking us through as well. So please be sure to tune into that. And then the following week on November 8th, we're going to have a presentation on American Graduate, which is a program put on by the Alabama Public Television, APT. It's a really interesting feature. We're going to be sending out more information about that, as well as some content for you to review. So please be sure to tune into that as well. And then moving on to the next slide, let's jump into Q&A. So first question, what did you say about the married and filed head of household? So Sarah, do you mind jumping back to that slide, or you don't have to go back to the slide, but re-reviewing married and head of household information as it pertains to filing the FAFSA?
Okay. So if someone is married and they file head of household, that is an incorrect filing status. They should file either married filing separately or married like married filing joint. If they do married, if they're married and they file head of household, that's conflicting information. And so the financial aid cannot be processed with that. And more than likely, the financial aid office or financial aid officer will suggest that the parents amend their taxes. And I know that's a difficult process, but unfortunately, it's an incorrect filing status. And so that's just the outcome.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, we have a couple of other questions over here in the chat section. So first question is, how is the housing plan information used in the process?
The housing plan information is used when the financial aid office creates the award package. And so we typically suggest that all students select living off campus. Living on campus. But it just depends on that student's specific situation. And so it's really just boils down to the actual packaging and the award that they'll be eligible for.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, so the next question is, will this webinar be available for me to share with parents at our FAFSA night? That's a question for me, and shame on me for not answering it before. The answer is yes. This webinar and all of our webinars go up on Alabama Possible's YouTube channel. So all you need to go is go to YouTube, type in Alabama Possible, and I've created a series on our YouTube channel called Fall 2018 Webinars. And so I'm going to upload this webinar there after we finish recording today. So thank you for asking that. It's important information. And really the point is for this information to get out there. So please feel free to share it with everyone. In addition to that, we will be following up today's webinar with an email. It'll include a link to the video on YouTube, as well as some other resources that we've discussed, plus our email address, website, and phone number so that you have that information available. Moving on to the last question that I've got here. What do I tell my students who say their parents didn't file their taxes? Sarah? Okay,
if the parents didn't file their taxes, then they'll select that on the FAFSA. More than likely, they will be, I'm actually sure that they'll be selected for verification, and they will have to provide information as far as how did they support themselves throughout the year. So did they receive disability, or did they receive SNAP benefits? Did they work but not file taxes? Did they receive a 1099? They will be selected. They will have to provide how they actually survived through the year. Did they live with a family member? Can they provide documentation for that, or that supports that? So the students can, the parent can still select will not file, but they will still have to gather some additional documentation. And the best thing to do is to follow up with the school so that they can give them a list of what they'll need to gather.
Excellent. All right, Sarah, just thank you so much for your insight. You truly are our FAFSA expert at the office. So thank you for participating and sharing this information with everybody that participated today. Again, here's our contact information, but I will follow up with an email with all of this as well, so you don't have to write it down right now. Thank you to everyone for participating in today's webinar, and I look forward to welcoming you back next week on our webinar on using data for your campaign. Have a great day, everyone, and be in touch soon.